The millionaire husband humiliated his pregnant wife. "You look like a whale." What happened to him brought him to his knees. Thomas Harris had everything a man could ever want. A sprawling mansion in Beverly Hills, a seat at the table with the most powerful business moguls in the country, and a bank account that seemed to grow by the second. His name commanded respect, his presence demanded attention, and his decisions shaped the financial world. Yet despite all his wealth, he remained indifferent to the one thing that truly mattered: his family. Anna had been by his side for years, standing quietly in the background while he built his empire. She was the kind of woman who believed in love, who saw the best in people, even in a man like Thomas. When she married him, she had envisioned a future filled with warmth, partnership, and a family that would be her greatest joy. But as time went on, she realized that Thomas had no intention of slowing down for anything, not even for her. At first, she accepted it. He was busy, constantly in meetings, traveling across the world, closing multi-million-dollar deals. She told herself that once things settled, he would make time for her, for them. But things never settled. If anything, his ambition only grew, and his presence at home became rarer. Conversations turned into formal exchanges. Moments of intimacy disappeared, and Anna found herself feeling more like a tenant in his mansion rather than his wife. Then came the pregnancy. When Anna found out she was expecting, she had been filled with a mixture of excitement and fear. She knew that a child would change everything, that their lives would never be the same. But she had also believed, perhaps foolishly, that this would bring Thomas closer to her, that he would finally see beyond the stock market, beyond the endless business ventures, and understand what truly mattered. She had been wrong the moment she told him. Thomas barely looked up from his laptop. "A baby," he muttered, as if the concept were a foreign inconvenience rather than the life-changing news she had expected him to celebrate. "Yes," she had said, forcing a smile. "We're going to be parents." Instead of joy, instead of even mild curiosity, his expression had been one of frustration. "Anna, do you have any idea how much I have on my plate right now? A baby is the last thing I need." The words had stung, but Anna told herself that he was just caught off guard, that he would come around, that maybe, deep down, some part of him would realize how much this meant to her. Months passed, and nothing changed. Thomas became colder, more distant. If he had once been emotionally unavailable, now he was completely detached. He rarely spoke to her, never attended any doctor's appointments, and barely acknowledged her growing belly. Anna spent countless nights alone in their king-sized bed, wondering where she had gone wrong. She had always known that Thomas wasn't the sentimental type, but she had believed, truly believed, that beneath the hardened businessman was a man capable of love. But Thomas made it clear that he saw no value in fatherhood. If anything, he seemed irritated by the entire situation. He refused to attend a single ultrasound, dismissing her excitement with a simple, "I have a meeting." The worst part wasn't the indifference. It was the way he looked at her before. She had been his wife, a woman he had pursued, courted, and married with a grand ceremony. Now she felt like an inconvenience. As her body changed, as her belly swelled with life, his eyes grew colder. His gaze lingered only long enough to show his disapproval, as if pregnancy had turned her into something unworthy of his attention. The love that had once existed between them had eroded, replaced by a wall of icy resentment. One evening, as Anna sat in their expansive dining room, she placed a hand over her belly, feeling the tiny kicks beneath her skin. It was the only comfort she had left. She wanted to share this moment with Thomas, to tell him how miraculous it all was, to make him see. But when he walked into the room, dressed in his usual tailored suit, he didn't even glance at her. He simply poured himself a glass of whiskey and checked his phone. She cleared her throat. "Thomas," he sighed. "What is it?" I thought maybe we could talk." His lips pressed into a thin line. "About what?" "About the baby." "About us." Thomas took a slow sip of his drink before finally looking at her. "Anna, I don't have time for this," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. Her chest tightened. "Do you even care?" At that, he let out a low chuckle, setting his glass down. "You're overthinking things, as always. Just focus on whatever it is pregnant women do, and I'll take care of the real responsibilities." Anna stared at him, trying to find even a glimmer of the man she had fallen in love with, but there was nothing left. She had once believed she could fix this, that if she held on long enough, if she proved her worth, he would finally see her. But as she sat there, in that cold, empty house, with the father of her child treating her like nothing more than an afterthought, she realized something. She was alone, and no matter how much she had loved Thomas, no matter how many years she had spent by his side, she could no longer pretend for the first time. The thought entered her mind, quiet but persistent. Maybe it was time to leave. Anna had spent the past few weeks trapped in a silent war within herself. The idea of leaving Thomas had taken root, but every time she considered it, doubt crept in. Was she really ready to walk away from the life she had built, from the man she had once loved? She had always prided herself on being loyal, on standing by the people she cared about, even when things were hard. But this was different. Thomas wasn't struggling. He simply didn't care. Still, part of her hoped for a sign, something, anything, that would prove there was still something worth saving. That sign never came. Instead, she found herself preparing for an evening that should have been special. A grand gala, one of the most prestigious events in their social circle. Thomas had insisted she attend, though not out of affection or pride. No, it was about appearances. He needed her there, standing beside him, playing the role of the devoted wife while he paraded his power and influence. And so she had agreed, even though her instincts screamed against it. She stood before the mirror in their enormous walk-in closet, adjusting the emerald green dress that hugged her swollen belly. The fabric was soft and elegant, designed to accentuate rather than hide her pregnancy. Anna had chosen it carefully, wanting to feel beautiful, to remind herself that she was more than just the woman Thomas had disregarded. Amanda had even helped her with her makeup, insisting she deserved to feel stunning for at least one night. "You're glowing, Anna," her friend had said. "He'd be an idiot not to see how beautiful you are." Anna had smiled at the compliment, but deep down, she knew the truth. Thomas didn't see her anymore. By the time they arrived at the gala, the room was filled with the elite, business tycoons, politicians, celebrities. Everything shimmered with excess, from the crystal chandeliers to the designer gowns. But to Anna, it all felt empty, as expected. Thomas barely acknowledged her, shaking hands with important investors, nodding to reporters, and flashing the charming smile that had once fooled her into believing he had a heart beneath all that ambition. Anna did her best to blend in, sipping water while others drank champagne, making polite conversation while keeping one hand on her belly. She could feel the glances, the silent judgment from women who lived for gossip, the curiosity from others who wondered how she had landed a man like Thomas for most of the night. She endured it. She smiled when necessary, nodded at the right moments, played the role of the perfect wife. Then came the breaking point. She had been standing by the bar when she overheard them, Thomas and a group of executives, laughing over their drinks. "And can you believe it, she insisted on coming," Thomas was saying, amusement dripping from his voice. "Man, I don't know how you do it," one of the men chuckled. "My wife turned into a whale when she was pregnant. Couldn't even look at her." Anna's stomach twisted. Then Thomas spoke again, his voice loud enough for her to hear. "You have no idea. It's like dragging around a parade float. Honestly, who would want to be seen with someone like that?" The room tilted for a moment. She thought she had misheard. Maybe he was talking about someone else, some joke she wasn't privy to. But when she turned, she found him smirking, whiskey in hand, his eyes glinting with cruel amusement. He knew she was there. He had wanted her to hear. A rush of heat flooded her cheeks, her hands trembling at her sides. She should have confronted him, should have called him out in front of everyone. But humiliation crushed her, thick and suffocating. She felt the weight of every stare in the room, some sympathetic, others entertained. The whispers started before she could move. Anna couldn't breathe. Without another word, she turned and walked away. She barely registered the grand marble staircase, the golden lights, the concerned murmurs from those who had seen everything. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses faded as she pushed through the ballroom doors. Stepping into the crisp night air, she wasn't sure how long she stood there, her body shaking, tears blurring her vision. Then she felt a hand on her arm. "Anna." Amanda's voice was gentle, but Anna could hear the concern beneath it. She turned, blinking rapidly, trying to force the lump down her throat. Amanda took one look at her face and didn't need to ask. What did he do? Anna let out a shaky breath. She stopped, unable to say the words. She shook her head. I can't do this anymore. Amanda squeezed her hand. Then don't. It was such a simple statement, but it hit like a revelation. Then don't. For months, she had been waiting for a reason to leave, for a sign that she was making the right decision. This was it. She swallowed hard, the weight of the realization pressing down on her chest. I have to go, she whispered. Amanda nodded, her expression firm. Then let's go. And just like that, something inside Anna shifted. She wasn't going to wait for an apology that would never come. She wasn't going to hold on to a love that had died long ago. Tonight, she was leaving. She didn't care about the house, the wealth, the life Thomas had built around his cold-hearted ambition. None of it mattered anymore. She was taking her baby and walking away. For good. The ride to Amanda's apartment was silent, except for the occasional sniffle that escaped Anna's lips. She sat in the passenger seat, one hand resting protectively on her belly, the other gripping her phone as if it were the only anchor she had left. Everything had happened so fast. One moment, she had been standing in that lavish ballroom, drowning in humiliation, and the next, she had walked away from the only life she had ever known. She should have been terrified, but as Amanda drove through the city streets, Anna realized something. She felt lighter. For the first time in a long time, the suffocating weight of Thomas's indifference wasn't crushing her. She was free, but freedom came with uncertainty. You're quiet, Amanda said softly, keeping her eyes on the road. Anna exhaled, glancing out the window at the glowing cityscape. I guess I just don't know what comes next. Amanda reached over, giving her knee a reassuring squeeze. You figure it out one step at a time, and you're not doing it alone. That was the thing about Amanda. She always knew exactly what to say. 15 minutes later, they pulled up in front of a modest apartment complex in a quiet neighborhood. It was a stark contrast to the sprawling mansion Anna had left behind, but for some reason it already felt warmer. Amanda parked the car and turned to her. You can stay as long as you need. No pressure. Anna bit her lip, overwhelmed by gratitude. I don't know how to thank you. Amanda waved her off. Please, you do the same for me. With a nod, Anna stepped out of the car, her body protesting after the long night. She followed Amanda up the stairs, clutching her small overnight bag, one of the few things she had grabbed in her rush to leave. Inside, the apartment was cozy, filled with soft lighting and the faint scent of vanilla. Anna sank onto the couch, exhaustion creeping in. Amanda plopped down beside her. So what's the plan? Anna let out a dry laugh. I have no idea. Well, Amanda said, tucking her legs beneath her. You have money, right? Anna hesitated. Some. She had her personal bank account, the one Thomas had never bothered to monitor. It wasn't much compared to his fortune, but it was enough to survive for a while. Amanda nodded. Good, that buys you time. And as for work, I haven't worked in years, Anna admitted. Not really. That's not true, Amanda countered. You studied graphic design, you did those freelance projects. Remember, you were good at it. Anna frowned. She had enjoyed it once, before Thomas had made her feel like anything outside of being his wife was a waste of time. Could she really start over? Amanda must have sensed her hesitation. Look, you don't have to figure everything out tonight, but if you want to work, you can, and if you need time to just be, that's okay too. Anna swallowed the lump in her throat. I just want to be able to take care of my baby. And you will. Amanda's voice was firm. You are so much stronger than you think, Anna. Anna let out a shaky breath. Maybe Amanda was right. Maybe. For the first time in her life, she was finally making the right choice. The next morning, Anna woke to the sound of birds chirping outside the window. The unfamiliar ceiling reminded her that she wasn't home. Not that she had ever truly felt at home in Thomas's mansion. She stretched, feeling the dull ache in her lower back from the pregnancy, and carefully got out of bed. Amanda was already up, sitting at the small kitchen table with a laptop open and a cup of coffee in hand. She looked up as Anna walked in. Morning, sunshine. Anna rubbed her eyes. What are you doing? Helping you, Amanda said simply, turning the laptop toward her. I found a few freelance design gigs. Nothing crazy, but it's a start. Anna's eyes widened. You really think I can do this? Amanda arched an eyebrow. I think you've been told you can't do a lot of things for a long time. It's time you stop believing it." Anna blinked back the tears that threatened to spill over. Sitting down at the table, she took a deep breath and clicked on the first job listing. She was starting over, and for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. 3 weeks passed, and Anna slowly began to build a new life. It wasn't easy. Some nights she lay awake wondering if she had made a mistake. Other days, she worried about the future, about raising a baby on her own. But then there were moments, small victories that reminded her she was stronger than she had ever known. The first time she submitted a design project and got paid. The first time she felt her baby kick and didn't immediately wish she had someone to share it with. The first time she laughed, really laughed, with Amanda over something ridiculous, realizing she hadn't done that in months. She still thought about Thomas, but not in the way she used to. Not with longing, not with hope. Instead, she thought of him as a lesson, a chapter in her life that had ended, but one that had led her here, to a place where she was finally learning who she was without him. One evening, as she sat on the couch, working on a new design for a client, Amanda walked in, holding a large envelope. "This came for you," she said, handing it over. Anna frowned, taking it hesitantly. The return address made her stomach drop. It was from Thomas's lawyer. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside, there was a single document, a divorce agreement. Her breath caught in her throat. She had known this was coming. Of course she had. But seeing it in black and white made it real. Amanda watched her carefully. "You okay?" Anna swallowed hard, then looked up. "Yeah," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "I think I am." And just like that, another weight lifted. She was truly free. For the first time in her life, Anna wasn't just surviving, she was moving forward. Thomas Harris sat at his desk, eyes scanning the rows of numbers on his screen. But for the first time in years, they didn't hold his attention. He clicked his pen absently, tapping it against the polished mahogany surface. Frustration simmering beneath his composed exterior, he had received confirmation that Anna had signed the divorce papers. That was what he wanted, wasn't it? A clean break, no messy emotions, no drawn-out arguments. She had walked away without a fight. Then why did he feel like something had shifted? With a sigh, he leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his jaw. His assistant, Lauren, walked in, holding a tablet. "Mr. Harris, your meeting with the London investors is in an hour. Do you want me to push it back?" "No," he said automatically, straightening. "I'll be there." Lauren nodded and left without another word. Thomas exhaled slowly, shaking off whatever distraction had settled over him. There was no time for this. Anna was gone, and frankly, he didn't care. At least that's what he told himself. The day passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and negotiations. By the time the sun dipped below the Los Angeles skyline, Thomas was nursing a glass of whiskey in his office, staring out the window. James Bennett, James, his business partner and longtime friend, walked in without knocking, as he always did. "Busy day?" James asked, pouring himself a drink from Thomas's bar cart. "When is it not?" Thomas muttered, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. James smirked. "You've been off lately." Thomas shot him a sharp look. "What are you talking about?" James shrugged. "You don't seem as focused, something on your mind." Thomas scoffed. "You're imagining things?" James leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. "Right, so your wife leaving you and filing for divorce didn't affect you at all." Thomas tensed but kept his expression neutral. "It was inevitable." "Inevitable," James repeated, amused. "You really don't care, do you?" Thomas met his gaze evenly. "No," James chuckled, shaking his head. "You're colder than I thought. Most men would at least pretend to give a damn." Thomas took a slow sip of his drink. "Anna was always too emotional. She wanted things I had no interest in giving." James raised an eyebrow. "Like a family." Thomas didn't answer because the truth was, James had hit a nerve. Anna had wanted a family. She had wanted something real, and Thomas had pushed her away at every turn. But it didn't matter. He had his business. His reputation, his power. That was what mattered. James studied him for a moment, then smirked. "Well, don't get too comfortable, Harris. Things are changing in the market. You might have bigger problems than your ex-wife." Thomas frowned. "What are you talking about?" James finished his drink and set the glass down. "You'll see soon enough." And with that, he walked out, leaving Thomas with a bad taste in his mouth. Days passed, and Thomas buried himself in work, ignoring anything that didn't involve business. Anna was a closed chapter. He told himself that over and over, but then he saw her, not in person. No, that would have been too easy. It was in a business magazine. Her photo was front and center, her name bold beneath it. Anna Turner, the rising star of graphic design. He nearly dropped his coffee. The article detailed her success, how she had built her own business from nothing, how companies were scrambling to work with her. There was even a mention of a major design firm looking to sign her, and in the photo, she looked radiant, glowing, successful, happy. For a moment, Thomas just stared, something foreign twisting in his chest. She had moved on. Without him, he had assumed she would struggle, that she would regret leaving. But here she was, thriving. He clenched his jaw and tossed the magazine aside. It didn't matter. Nothing had changed. Anna's success had nothing to do with him. She could do whatever she wanted, and he would do what he had always done. Move forward, alone. Thomas Harris had always believed that no matter the circumstances, he would land on his feet. He had built his empire from the ground up, outmaneuvered ruthless competitors, and turned risks into fortunes. He thrived in high-stakes environments. He was untouchable, or so he thought. But that belief began to crumble the moment he realized James Bennett had betrayed him. It started with small inconsistencies in the financial reports. A missing transaction here, a questionable investment there. At first, Thomas dismissed it. Errors happened. Numbers fluctuated. There was always an explanation, but when he dug deeper, the picture became clearer and uglier. James hadn't just mismanaged funds. He had been siphoning millions from the company under Thomas's nose, funneling money into offshore accounts, moving assets in ways that, if left unchecked, could bring everything crashing down. And the worst part, it had been happening for years. Thomas stormed into the boardroom where James sat at the head of the long glass table, surrounded by executives who looked uncomfortable as soon as they saw Thomas's expression. "What the hell is going on, James?" Thomas demanded, throwing a folder onto the table. James, ever the composed strategist, barely blinked. "Good morning to you too." "Cut the crap," Thomas snapped. "Explain these numbers." James leaned back in his chair, glancing at the documents with mild amusement. "I don't know what you're implying." Thomas's jaw tightened. "You've been stealing from the company." The room fell silent. James exhaled, shaking his head as if Thomas were a child throwing a tantrum. "Stealing, that's a strong word. You moved millions into offshore accounts. You put my name on investments I never approved. You signed deals that put us in jeopardy." James didn't deny it. Instead, he smirked. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for, Harris," he said. "But you're too late." Thomas's hands curled into fists. "You son of a—" James raised a hand, feigning boredom. "Save the outrage. This was inevitable." Thomas's pulse pounded. "You were my business partner, and you were too arrogant to see what was happening right in front of you." James replied smoothly. "Let me guess. You were too busy ignoring your pregnant wife to notice, weren't you?" The jab landed harder than Thomas expected. His teeth clenched. "This company is mine." James chuckled. "Not for long." Thomas's stomach twisted. "What does that mean?" James leaned forward, his smirk deepening. "It means I own more of this company than you think. It means the board is already looking at alternative leadership, and it means you're running out of options." Thomas stared at him, realization sinking in. James wasn't just stealing from him, he was taking everything. "You're bluffing," Thomas said, but his voice lacked conviction. James stood, straightening his tie. "You'll find out soon enough." Then, with a final smirk, he walked out, leaving Thomas standing in the wreckage of his own making. Over the next week, Thomas fought to salvage what he could. He met with lawyers, tried to regain control of the assets, attempted to rally support from investors. But James had played his cards perfectly. One by one, people turned their backs on him. Investors withdrew, stocks plummeted, clients severed ties. The company, the empire Thomas had spent years building, was slipping through his fingers. And for the first time in his life, he was powerless. The final blow came when the board officially removed him as CEO. Thomas sat in the conference room as the vote was cast, his jaw tight, his fingers gripping the armrest of his chair. "This is a mistake," he said coldly, looking at each board member. "You know what I've built. an older man across the table sighed. "We also know the damage that's been done. The company can't afford this scandal." "You mean you can't afford to be associated with me?" Thomas corrected. No one denied it. Moments later, the decision was finalized. James Bennett was now in charge. Thomas Harris was out. As he walked out of the building that had once been his kingdom, a camera flash went off in his face. Then another, and another. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions, microphones shoved toward him. "Mr. Harris, what do you have to say about your removal? Are the rumors true that James Bennett orchestrated this from the beginning? Do you have a plan to recover from this?" Thomas ignored them all. He climbed into his car, slammed the door shut, and exhaled shakily for the first time in his life. He had nothing. No company, no allies, no power, and no wife waiting for him at home. For the first time, Thomas Harris was completely alone. Anna sat at her small kitchen table, staring at her laptop screen in disbelief. She had just received an email from Weston & Co., one of the most prestigious design firms in the country. "Congratulations, Mrs. Turner. We were thoroughly impressed by your portfolio. We'd love to discuss a potential long-term collaboration. Please let us know your availability for a meeting." Her hands trembled as she reread the message, her heart pounding. A few months ago, she had been nothing more than Anna Harris, the neglected wife of a cold businessman, trapped in a life that never truly felt like hers. Now, she was Anna Turner again, her own person, her own success story, and people were finally recognizing her work. A wide smile spread across her face. She had done this. She had built something for herself. Her career was just beginning, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly proud of herself. Amanda, of course, nearly knocked over her coffee when Anna told her the news. "This is huge," Amanda practically shouted, grabbing Anna's hands. "Anna, do you realize what this means?" Anna laughed, shaking her head. "I know it's an opportunity, but Amanda cut her off. No, this isn't just an opportunity. This is a turning point. This company is huge. You don't just get an offer from them unless you're incredible at what you do, and you are." Anna felt warmth spread through her chest. For so long, she had let Thomas's words define her, that she was just his wife, that she wasn't meant for anything more, but that wasn't true. Amanda was right. She was good at this, and this offer was proof. "All right," Anna said, taking a deep breath. "I'll set up the meeting." Amanda grinned. "Damn right you will." A few days later, Anna sat across from Daniel Weston, the head of Weston & Co., in a sleek, modern office overlooking the city skyline. He was a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a warm smile, dressed impeccably in a navy blue suit. "Anna," he said, folding his hands, "I have to say, your work speaks for itself. The clean aesthetics, the balance between creativity and functionality. Your designs are exactly what we're looking for." Anna's heart swelled. "Thank you," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the excitement bubbling inside her. Daniel leaned forward. "We'd like to bring you on board for an upcoming project, a full rebranding for one of our top clients. If all goes well, we'd be happy to discuss something more permanent." Anna blinked. A full rebranding. That was major. She had expected small contracts, minor contributions. But this was big. "That sounds incredible," she said. "Great," Daniel said, sliding a contract across the table. "Take your time to review it. But I can tell you now, we'd be lucky to have you." Anna picked up the contract, her fingers brushing over the thick paper. This was it. Her new life was truly beginning. That evening, Anna sat on Amanda's couch, the signed contract in her lap. Amanda popped open a bottle of sparkling cider. Grinning, "We are celebrating." Anna laughed, shaking her head. "I can't believe this is happening." Amanda handed her a glass. "Believe it, you earned this." Anna took a sip, letting the reality sink in. A few months ago, she had felt lost. Now she had a career, a future, and a baby on the way. A baby she would raise in a world where she was independent, strong and capable. Her past no longer defined her, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly free. Meanwhile, across the city, Thomas sat in the dim light of his penthouse, a nearly empty bottle of whiskey on the table beside him. He had been avoiding the news, avoiding anything that reminded him of how far he had fallen. But tonight, he had made the mistake of turning on the television. And there she was. Anna, the business segment of a financial network, was discussing rising entrepreneurs. And there she was, her photo on the screen, her name flashing beneath it. Anna Turner has emerged as one of the most sought-after designers in the industry. Her recent partnership with Weston & Co. marks a new chapter in her already impressive career. Thomas clenched his jaw. Anna wasn't just surviving without him. She was thriving. He had assumed she would struggle, that she would fail without him. But instead, she had rebuilt herself from nothing. And the worst part, she looked happier than ever. Thomas turned off the TV, gripping the remote so tightly his knuckles turned white. Everything in his life had crumbled, and the one person who had always been there, who had always believed in him, was gone. Maybe, just maybe, he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The walls of Thomas Harris's penthouse had never felt so suffocating. Once a sanctuary of power and control, his home now resembled nothing more than a cage, one he had built with his own arrogance. Whiskey bottles lined the sleek marble countertop, remnants of nights spent drowning in regret. The city skyline stretched out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. But for the first time, he felt no sense of ownership over it. He had lost everything: his company, his fortune, his reputation, his wife. No, not his wife. Anna wasn't his anymore. She had made that clear when she walked away. And now, the world had seen it too. Her name was everywhere. Anna Turner, the rising design star. Her success was being broadcast for all to see, while he was left picking up the shattered remains of his own empire. And the worst part, she had done it all without him. Thomas let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through his disheveled hair. How had it come to this? He spent the next few days in a fog of self-destruction, avoiding calls, ignoring the mounting financial disasters that loomed over him. But eventually, reality forced its way back in. A notice of foreclosure landed on his desk. The penthouse, the last piece of his former life, was no longer his. He had weeks before it would be auctioned off. Thomas sat at his desk, staring at the legal document in front of him, fingers tightening around the edges. He had never been a man who accepted failure. But this wasn't just failure. This was humiliation. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Lauren, his former assistant, stepped inside, looking hesitant. She was one of the few people who hadn't abandoned him entirely. But even she seemed wary these days. "I thought you should know," she said, setting a newspaper on his desk. Thomas didn't need to look at the headline to know what it was. Anna's face stared back at him, her name printed in bold letters. She was everywhere. Lauren hesitated. "Are you okay?" He let out a dry chuckle. "What do you think?" She sighed, but there was no pity in her expression, just frustration. "You know," she said carefully, "it's not just James that ruined you." Thomas's gaze snapped to her. "Excuse me." Lauren crossed her arms. "You built everything on power and control. You treated people like they were disposable, so now, when you have nothing left, no one is here." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I don't need a lecture." "No," she said, "you need a reality check." She turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Anna didn't just survive without you, Thomas. She's thriving. Maybe it's time you figure out why." And then she was gone. The following evening, Thomas found himself in front of his laptop. An empty glass beside him. For hours he had resisted the urge to look her up, but in the end, curiosity won. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before finally typing, "Anna Turner, designer." Instantly, a flood of articles, interviews, and images filled the screen. He clicked on a recent video interview. Anna sat across from a journalist in a bright modern studio. She looked poised, confident, alive in a way he had never seen before. "It's been an incredible journey," she was saying. "Starting over wasn't easy, but I realized that sometimes losing everything is the best thing that can happen to you." Thomas's stomach twisted. "I used to think I needed to fit into someone else's world," Anna continued. "But now I'm building my own." The interviewer smiled. "And you've certainly done that. Your upcoming projects are some of the most anticipated in the industry. What advice would you give to women who are looking to reinvent themselves after leaving a difficult situation?" Anna's eyes softened, and for a moment Thomas thought she might hesitate, but then she smiled. Genuine, warm, free. "Believe in yourself," she said. "Don't wait for someone else to give you permission to chase your dreams, and never let anyone make you feel small." Thomas shut the laptop for the first time since she left. He realized something that gutted him. Anna wasn't looking back. not even once. And for the first time in his life, Thomas felt something he had never truly known: regret. The streets of New York were alive with their usual energy. Horns blaring, pedestrians rushing, the scent of roasted peanuts wafting from food carts. Thomas Harris barely noticed any of it. He had been in the city for 3 days, trying to salvage what little remained of his reputation. But each meeting ended the same way: polite handshakes, forced smiles, and thinly veiled rejection. Doors that had once opened for him without question were now firmly shut. Thomas Harris was no longer a name that carried weight. His final meeting had just ended in another disappointment. The investment firm he had approached wasn't interested in damaged goods. Their words, the irony wasn't lost on him. A man who had once discarded people without a second thought had now become the one being discarded. Shoving his hands into his coat pockets, he started walking. No real destination in mind. He told himself he was just clearing his head. But deep down, he knew what was pulling him forward. Somewhere in this city, Anna was thriving. And whether he admitted it or not, he wanted to see her again, even if it was just from a distance. The upscale hotel lobby was buzzing with conversation, the scent of fresh flowers lingering in the air. Businessmen in tailored suits milled about, sipping cocktails and discussing their latest ventures. Thomas didn't belong here anymore, but he had heard about this event, a networking gala for designers, architects, and entrepreneurs, a place where Anna would likely be. His heart pounded as he stepped inside. What was he even doing here? He had no right to seek her out, no reason to believe she would want to see him. But before he could turn around and leave, he saw her, Anna. She stood near the center of the room, engaged in conversation with a small group of people. Her laughter rang out, light and genuine, as if she had never known the weight of sadness. She was glowing. Her sleek navy dress hugged her figure, accentuating the baby bump that had once been a burden in his eyes. But now, all he could see was how stunning she looked. How much he had lost. He barely registered the murmurs around him, the way people recognized him, whispered about his fall from grace. All he could focus on was her. And then, as if sensing him, Anna turned. Their eyes met for a moment. The world stilled. Shock flickered across her face, followed by something unreadable. But it lasted only a second before she schooled her expression into one of indifference. She turned away, continuing her conversation as if he weren't even there, as if he were nothing. Thomas swallowed hard. It was the reaction he deserved, but it still hurt. He should have left. He should have accepted the silent message Anna had given him. But Thomas had never been the type to walk away from something he wanted. And for the first time in his life, he realized he wanted her back. Not because she was successful now, not because she had proven him wrong, but because she had always been so much more than he ever saw. Taking a deep breath, he made his way across the room, dodging the curious glances, ignoring the hushed whispers. When he reached her, Anna was mid-sentence, talking to an older man about an upcoming project. She paused, her jaw tightening, before slowly turning to face him. Thomas. Her voice was calm, even, uninterested. His chest tightened. She used to say his name with warmth, with love. Not anymore. Anna, he said, keeping his voice steady. Excuse me, she interrupted, turning back to her conversation. Dismissed, like he was nobody. Thomas had always been the one to cut people off, to walk away first. But now she held the power, and for the first time in his life he understood what it felt like to be on the receiving end of it. Later that night, after the gala had ended, Thomas found himself standing outside the hotel, leaning against the cold stone wall. He had no idea what he was waiting for. But then, the doors swung open, and Anna stepped outside, alone. He straightened, hesitating. Then, as if sensing him, she sighed. "You don't give up easily, do you?" she muttered, not bothering to turn around. Thomas took a slow step closer. "Not when it's important," Anna exhaled, finally turning to face him. The city lights reflected in her eyes, making her look almost untouchable. "I don't know what you're expecting, Thomas," she said, crossing her arms. "You don't get to show up here and act like—" She stopped, shaking her head. "Like you care." He took a breath. "I do care." She let out a humorless laugh. "That's funny, considering you didn't care when it actually mattered." Thomas clenched his jaw. "I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" Anna's voice sharpened. "You humiliated me. You made me feel worthless. And now that your life has fallen apart, You suddenly care." His chest tightened, because she was right. For years he had dismissed her feelings. He had pushed her away. And now, here he was, desperate to pull her back. But it wasn't about his failures. It wasn't about the business, the money, the reputation he had lost. It was about the life he had let slip through his fingers. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, voice low, "but I needed to see you." Anna studied him for a long moment. Then, finally, she sighed. "You saw me," she said simply. Then she turned, walked toward the curb, and got into a waiting car. Thomas stood there, watching the taillights disappear down the street for the first time in his life. He wasn't the one leaving, Anna was, and she wasn't looking back. Thomas sat in his near-empty penthouse, staring at the untouched drink in front of him. The once sleek modern space felt foreign now, cold and lifeless, stripped of the power it used to represent. Anna's words replayed in his mind, sharp and unforgiving. "You don't get to show up here and act like you care." She was right. He had cared too late, and now he had nothing left to offer. His fingers tightened around his glass as his phone buzzed against the table. James Bennett. For a long moment, he debated ignoring it. But then, rage burned through him like a slow simmering fire. James was the reason he had lost everything: the company, his wealth, his reputation. And while Thomas had made his own mistakes, James had orchestrated his downfall. Slowly, he picked up the call. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice cold. James chuckled on the other end. "Come on, Harris, no need for hostility. I was just thinking about you. How's life on the other side?" Thomas gritted his teeth. "If you called to gloat, save it." James sighed dramatically. "Relax, I actually have a business proposition for you." Thomas scoffed. "You think I'd work with you after what you did?" "Who said anything about working together?" James mused. "I just thought you might want a little information. Something that could be useful to you." Thomas stilled. James knew exactly how to bait him. "Go on," he said carefully. James chuckled again. "Meet me at the Harbor Club, 1 hour." Then the line went dead. Thomas exhaled slowly, gripping his phone. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap. But if there was even a chance that James had valuable information, he couldn't ignore it. He needed to know what he was up against. The Harbor Club was one of the last places Thomas wanted to be. It was a gathering place for the powerful, the elite, the people who had once respected him but now whispered about his downfall. Walking in, he felt their eyes on him. Once, he had commanded attention with confidence. Now, he was nothing more than a cautionary tale. James sat in a private booth, swirling a glass of whiskey, looking every bit the smug bastard Thomas remembered. "Glad you made it," James said with a smirk as Thomas slid into the seat across from him. "Cut the crap," Thomas said. "Talk." James chuckled. "Straight to business. That's what I always liked about you." Thomas clenched his jaw. "Say what you have to say, or I'm leaving." James leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "You're not the only one I went after, Harris." Thomas narrowed his eyes. "What are you talking about?" James smirked. "You really think your little ex-wife made it to the top all on her own?" A dangerous heat flared in Thomas's chest. "What the hell are you saying?" James took a sip of his drink, savoring the moment before continuing. "I've been watching Anna's rise, and I'll admit, she's talented. But success like that, it doesn't happen without a few obstacles." Thomas's hands curled into fists. "What did you do?" James shrugged. "Nothing serious, just a few calls. A couple of well-placed rumors making sure certain deals fell through." He grinned. "I figured, why not make things harder for her?" Rage coiled inside Thomas like a viper ready to strike. "You went after Anna." His voice was low, dangerous. James leaned back, unbothered. "Relax. She didn't even know it was me. She just kept pushing forward. I have to admit, she surprised me." Thomas saw red. James had already taken everything from him, and now he was trying to destroy Anna too. The realization hit him like a freight train. For years, Thomas had been blind to the damage his so-called friend had caused. He had thought James was an ally. He had been a fool. "You want to know the best part?" James continued, smirking. "I wasn't even done yet. I had more planned, but now that I see how well she's doing..." He chuckled. "I might just finish what I started." Something inside Thomas snapped before he could think, before he could stop himself. He grabbed James by the collar and slammed him against the back of the booth. "If you so much as breathe in Anna's direction again, I will destroy you," Thomas growled. The smirk finally vanished from James's face. "You think you can threaten me?" James sneered, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. Thomas tightened his grip. "Watch me." The tension stretched thick between them. Then, slowly, Thomas released him. James straightened his jacket, his arrogance returning as he smoothed out the fabric. "You've changed, Harris," he said, eyeing him with mild amusement. "Guess losing everything does that to a man." Thomas didn't respond. Instead, he stood, his fists clenched at his sides. He had wasted too much time being blind, too much time being the man James had manipulated. No more. Anna had fought for everything she had, and now it was his turn to fight. Without another word, Thomas turned and walked out of the club. James's voice followed him. "This isn't over, Harris." Thomas didn't look back. For the first time in his life, he knew exactly what he had to do, and it started with protecting the one person he should have protected all along. Thomas's mind was racing as he stepped out of the harbor club and into the cold night air. The weight of James's words sat heavy on his chest. Pressing down like a stone, Anna had worked tirelessly to build herself up, and James had been trying to tear her down behind the scenes, and Thomas, a man who once claimed to be powerful, had been blind to it all, not anymore. For the first time in his life, he was going to do the right thing. By the time he got back to his penthouse, his soon-to-be foreclosed penthouse, Thomas had already made up his mind. James needed to be stopped. Pulling out his laptop, he logged into his old accounts, scanning through business transactions, legal documents, and financial records. He still had some access, even after being ousted from his own company. If James had been operating in the shadows, there had to be a trail. And if Thomas could find it, he could take him down for good. For 2 days, Thomas barely slept. He dug through old files, called former contacts, reached out to people who owed him favors. What he found was worse than he expected. James hadn't just been sabotaging Anna. He had been running a fraudulent operation for years, bribing officials, forging contracts, embezzling funds. James had been playing a long game, and Thomas had been too arrogant to see the moves being made right in front of him. But now, he had proof, and there was only one person he wanted to warn first. Anna. Thomas hadn't spoken to Anna since their encounter at the gala, and he had no idea how she would react when she saw him again. But he had to try. He knew where she worked now. Her growing design firm had just opened an office in the heart of the city. So, against all logic, against every instinct telling him to stay away, he went there. The receptionist looked surprised when he walked in. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, looking him up and down. "No," he admitted, "but I need to see Anna Turner. It's urgent." She hesitated. "Ms. Turner is very busy." Thomas clenched his jaw. "Tell her it's about James Bennett." That got her attention. A few minutes later, he was being led down a hallway to a sleek office. Anna was standing behind her desk, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. She looked stronger than the last time he had stood in front of her. "Thomas," she said, her voice cool, "this is unexpected." He swallowed hard. "I know you don't want to see me, and I don't blame you, but I have something you need to hear." She sighed. "If this is another pathetic attempt to... It's about James." That made her pause. Her fingers tightened slightly around her desk. "What about him?" Thomas stepped forward. "He's been trying to sabotage your business. I have proof." Anna's lips pressed into a thin line. "Why would he do that?" "Because he's a manipulative bastard," Thomas said bluntly. "And because he knew it would hurt me." Anna's expression didn't change, but he saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes. "I don't need your help, Thomas. This isn't about me," he said. "This is about you." She hesitated, and that was all he needed. Slowly, he reached into his briefcase, pulled out the folder of documents, and set them on her desk. "I don't expect you to trust me," he admitted, "but look through these. See for yourself." Anna studied him for a long moment. Then, finally, she picked up the papers. As she flipped through them, her face changed, her confidence faltered, replaced by a slow, simmering anger. "This is real?" she asked, her voice tight. "Yes." She closed the folder, exhaling slowly. Then she looked up at him, and for the first time in a long time, there was something in her eyes other than hatred. Not trust, not forgiveness, but something close to understanding. "What's your plan?" she finally asked. Thomas let out a breath. "I take him down," he said. "For good?" Anna sat in silence, the weight of the documents pressing heavily in her hands. The truth about James was laid out in black and white. His corruption, his attempts to sabotage her business, his long history of fraud, and Thomas had been the one to bring it to her. She wasn't sure what unsettled her more, the fact that James had been actively working against her, or the fact that Thomas had gone out of his way to protect her. She exhaled slowly, glancing at the man across from her. There was something different about him, the arrogance, the self-importance. They weren't as sharp as before, and for the first time in a long time, she saw the man beneath the mask. Not the ruthless businessman, not the cold, detached husband, just a man who had lost everything and was trying to do something right. "What exactly are you planning to do?" she asked, setting the papers down. Thomas leaned forward, his expression firm. "James has enemies. He's been playing both sides for years, and I guarantee there are people out there who would love to see him exposed." Anna crossed her arms. "So, what, you want to take this to the authorities?" "That's part of it," Thomas admitted. "But James is slippery. He'll try to cover his tracks if we want to bring him down. We have to make sure he can't escape." Anna studied him carefully. "And what's your angle in all of this?" His jaw tightened. "I don't have one." She raised an eyebrow. "I know I don't deserve your trust, Anna," he continued. "I know I've done nothing to earn it. But I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do." Anna hesitated. For years, Thomas had never done anything without self-interest. And yet, this felt different. She exhaled, leaning back in her chair. "Fine. What do you need from me?" Thomas didn't hesitate. "Your contacts. The people you've been working with in the industry. If we can get enough of them to confirm that James has been interfering in your business, it strengthens the case against him." Anna nodded slowly. She didn't like this. She didn't want to work with Thomas, but if it meant taking James down, she would do whatever it took. "All right," she said finally. "Let's do it." The next 48 hours were a blur. Anna reached out to her business contacts, carefully gathering statements from those who had experienced suspicious dealings with James. Meanwhile, Thomas worked behind the scenes, tracking James's financial records, digging into every shady deal he could find. The more they uncovered, the worse it got. James wasn't just sabotaging Anna. He had been embezzling millions from investors, and now they had the proof. By the end of the week, everything was in place. Thomas had set up a meeting with federal investigators, ensuring that the evidence would be taken seriously. And Anna had contacted a journalist, someone willing to expose James in the press, ensuring that even if James tried to wiggle out legally, his reputation would be destroyed. The final step, confronting James himself. They found him in his office, a luxurious high-rise that overlooked the city. James looked up as they entered, his lips curling into a smirk. "Well, well," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I was wondering when you'd come crawling back, Harris." And Anna, what a surprise. Anna didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she calmly placed the thick folder of evidence on his desk. James's smirk faltered. "What's this?" he asked, flipping it open. As he scanned the contents, his expression darkened. Anna crossed her arms. "It's over, James." He let out a cold laugh. "You think this means anything? I have lawyers. I have connections. You can't." Thomas cut him off. "We already sent it to the authorities." James's eyes snapped up. "And to the press," Anna added. "By tomorrow, your name will be everywhere. No one will trust you. No one will do business with you." A flicker of fear crossed James's face, but he masked it quickly. "You two really think you're going to take me down?" he sneered. "You think anyone's going to believe the disgraced Thomas Harris and his bitter ex-wife?" Anna tilted her head. "I think the FBI might." James stiffened, and for the first time he realized he had lost. Thomas leaned in, his voice deadly calm. "You stole my company. You ruined my reputation. You tried to destroy Anna's career. But you know what, James? You made one mistake." James swallowed hard. "And what's that?" Thomas smirked. "You underestimated us." 2 days later, James Bennett was arrested for fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. Anna watched the news from her office, arms crossed as the footage played. James being led out of his building in handcuffs, the reporters swarming him, the business world turning its back on him. It was over. A slow exhale escaped her lips. "Justice?" Amanda asked, standing beside her. Anna gave a small smile. "Justice?" Amanda nudged her gently. "And Thomas?" Anna hesitated. The truth was, she didn't know. He had done the right thing, but that didn't change the past, and it certainly didn't mean she was ready to let him back into her life. But as she looked back at the screen, she realized something. For the first time, Thomas had chosen to stand beside her instead of against her. And maybe, just maybe, that meant something. 2 weeks had passed since James Bennett's arrest. The business world had turned against him overnight, and everything he had built through deception had crumbled. The media had been relentless, covering every detail of his crimes. Investors withdrew their support. Former allies denied ever knowing him. And just like that, James had become nothing. Anna should have felt relieved. But as she sat in her office, staring at the view outside, she realized that something still felt unfinished. Not with James, with Thomas. She had expected him to disappear after everything was said and done, to go back to whatever was left of his life. But he hadn't. Instead, he had stayed quiet. No phone calls, no desperate attempts to win her over. And that, more than anything else, was what confused her. Had he finally let her go, or was he waiting for her to decide if he was still worth a second chance? That evening, Anna found herself walking through a quiet park near her apartment, the crisp air wrapping around her. She wasn't sure why she was here, but something inside her had pushed her to take a walk, to think. She had spent so long hating Thomas for what he had done, for what he had failed to be. But lately, something had changed. He had done the right thing, even when he had nothing to gain from it, and for the first time, she had seen glimpses of the man he could have been, the man she had once believed in. "Anna?" She froze. Slowly, she turned. Thomas stood a few feet away. His suit was gone, his sharp, arrogant posture replaced with something softer. There was no confidence in his stance, just a man who looked like he had lost everything and wasn't sure if he had the right to ask for anything else. Anna's heart pounded. "What are you doing here?" she asked. He let out a quiet breath. "I wasn't expecting to see you." Anna studied him for a long moment. Then finally she said, "Are you okay?" Thomas blinked. He clearly hadn't expected her to ask that. "I don't know," he admitted. That was new. Thomas Harris never admitted weakness, and yet here he was, standing in front of her, not pretending. She exhaled. "What happens now?" His lips parted slightly, as if he had an answer, but he didn't, because for once, this wasn't his decision to make. It was hers, and he knew it. Anna's throat tightened. She had always believed that forgiveness was something given easily, but now she wasn't sure if she could ever truly forgive him. Not completely, not for everything, but she had seen his regret. She had seen his change, and deep down, she knew the truth. He wasn't the man she had married. He wasn't the man who had broken her. He was someone else now, and maybe, just maybe, that meant something. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted softly. Thomas held her gaze. "I don't either," he whispered, and for the first time, that was enough. Anna had always imagined what the moment would feel like, bringing a new life into the world. She had pictured it many times. Back when she had first learned she was pregnant, she had imagined happiness, excitement, a partner by her side. Instead, it had been months of loneliness, uncertainty, and rebuilding herself from the ground up. And now, the moment was here, but she wasn't scared. She was ready. The first contraction hit in the early hours of the morning, sharp, unmistakable. Anna sat up in bed, pressing a hand to her stomach, her baby's movement strong beneath her touch. It was time. Amanda, who had insisted on staying over as the due date approached, woke up instantly at the sound of Anna's quiet gasp. "Is it happening?" she asked, voice laced with excitement and concern. Anna nodded, taking a slow breath. "Yeah, it's happening." Amanda threw off the blankets and immediately jumped into action. "All right, we're ready for this. I've got your hospital bag packed, the car's downstairs, and we're not panicking." Anna let out a soft laugh. "You're the one who sounds like she's panicking." Amanda pointed a finger at her. "I will panic later. Right now, we're getting you to the hospital." By the time they reached the hospital, the contractions had intensified. The nurses were calm, efficient, getting her settled into the delivery room. Anna focused on breathing, on the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest, on the knowledge that soon, so soon, she would be holding her baby in her arms. She was ready, and she was doing this on her own. Except, she wasn't. Not completely, because when the doctor entered the room, Thomas was behind him. Anna's breath hitched. He looked uncertain, hesitant, almost out of place, like he knew he had no right to be here, like he was waiting for her to tell him to leave. She could have told the nurse to escort him out, but she didn't, because despite everything, despite all the pain, the mistakes, the history between them, some part of her still knew that he was the father of her child, and right now, that was what mattered most. The hours blurred together. Pain, exhaustion, the overwhelming intensity of bringing a child into the world. Thomas stayed in the corner at first, silent, watching. But as the contractions worsened, as Anna's body trembled with the effort, he moved closer. When she gripped the bed rail, her knuckles white, he reached for her hand, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. She let him stay. She let him be there, not as the man who had hurt her, not as the man she had left behind, but as the father of her child. And when their baby's first cries filled the room, when she collapsed back against the pillows in exhaustion and relief, Thomas squeezed her hand gently. She turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes. There were tears in them. Raw, real. He had never looked at her like this before. Like she was the most incredible thing he had ever seen. Like he finally understood just how much he had lost, and just how much he still had left to fight for. A few hours later, Anna sat propped up in bed, cradling the tiny, delicate life in her arms. A boy, their son. She traced a finger over his soft cheek. Overwhelmed by the love crashing through her, it was unlike anything she had ever felt. Unconditional, unbreakable. Hers. Thomas sat quietly at the edge of the room, watching them. For once, he didn't push. He didn't demand space. Didn't assume he had a right to anything. He was waiting, and for the first time, Anna realized that was enough. She looked up at him. "Do you want to hold him?" Thomas stilled for a moment. He looked like he wasn't sure he had heard her correctly. Then, slowly, carefully, he nodded. Anna adjusted the baby in her arms, her heart pounding as she extended him toward Thomas. He reached out, hands slightly unsteady, as if he were afraid he might break something so precious. And when their son settled into his arms, everything changed. Thomas inhaled sharply, his expression unreadable, but Anna saw it. She saw the awe, the fear, the love, and in that moment she knew this wasn't the same Thomas Harris she had once known. And maybe, just maybe, that meant there was still something left between them, something that wasn't completely broken, not yet, not forever. Thomas had never felt more terrified in his life, holding his newborn son in his arms, feeling the tiny weight against his chest. He realized something profound. For the first time, he had no control. Business deals, power moves, financial empires, those he could control. But this fragile, breathing miracle wrapped in a hospital blanket, this was different. The baby stirred slightly, a soft sound escaping his lips, and Thomas froze, afraid he might be holding him the wrong way. Anna, still resting in bed, watched him carefully. "You can relax," she said, her voice soft. "He's not going to break." Thomas swallowed hard, nodding, but his hands remained stiff. Anna sighed. "Here." She reached out, adjusting his arms just slightly, helping him cradle their son in a way that felt right. And then, for the first time, Thomas truly looked at the child in his arms. His son, their son. A lump formed in his throat. "He's perfect," Thomas murmured. Anna's lips curved into a small smile. "Yeah, he is." Silence settled between them, not the cold, bitter silence they had once shared, but something softer, something that felt like the beginning of something new. Over the next few days, Thomas barely left the hospital. He didn't expect Anna to want him there, but she didn't push him away. And so, he stayed. He sat beside her as she held the baby. He watched as she fed him, as she whispered to him in the quiet hours of the night. And slowly, something inside Thomas began to change. Every time he looked at his son, he felt something he had never known before. Love, not the kind of love that was transactional, Not the kind of love that came with conditions, but something deeper, something that terrified him. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about someone else, someone who needed him, not as a businessman, not as a powerful figure, but as a father. On the third night, Thomas sat in the hospital chair, watching as Anna dozed lightly, their baby asleep in the bassinet beside her. He felt helpless, not in the way he had when he lost his company. That loss had been about pride, but this was about redemption. He wanted to be there for his son. He wanted to make sure Anna never had to do this alone, but he didn't know if she would ever let him, and maybe he didn't deserve for her to. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Then he did something he never thought he would do. He reached out and took his son's tiny hand in his, and for the first time, he made a promise. "I won't fail you." The words were barely a whisper, but he meant them more than anything. The next morning, as Anna packed up to leave the hospital, she glanced at Thomas, uncertainty in her expression. Neither of them had talked about what came next. And now, the question loomed between them. "Do you have a place to stay?" she finally asked. Thomas hesitated. He could lie. He could pretend he still had everything figured out, but instead he shook his head. "No." Anna studied him for a long moment. Then, to his surprise, she sighed and said, "Come with us." Thomas blinked. She wasn't offering reconciliation. She wasn't asking him to come back into her life the way he once had. But she was giving him a chance to be there, a chance to be a father. And for the first time in his life, Thomas Harris realized something. That was the only chance that mattered. Thomas had never been nervous about anything in his life. Not about high-stakes business deals. Not about cutting ruthless competitors out of multi-million-dollar investments. Not even about losing his company. But this, sitting in the back seat of a car, watching Anna cradle their newborn son as Amanda drove them home from the hospital, this made him feel something unfamiliar. Fear, not the fear of failure or public humiliation, but the fear of not being enough. The fear of ruining something so pure, so fragile. He had no idea how to be a father, but now, as he sat beside Anna, watching his son's tiny chest rise and fall, he knew he had to learn. Amanda helped Anna settle into her apartment, arranging pillows, setting down baby supplies, making sure she was comfortable. Thomas, on the other hand, stood awkwardly near the door. Feeling completely out of place, he had never been in Anna's new home. She had built this life without him, and yet, she had let him come, not as her husband, not as the man she had once loved, but as the father of her child, and that meant everything. Amanda glanced at Thomas as she set down a bag of diapers. "You look like you're about to have a panic attack." Thomas shot her a sharp look. "I'm fine," Amanda smirked. "Sure, tough guy." Then she turned to Anna. "Call me if you need anything." Anna smiled softly. "I will." Amanda gave Thomas one last look, a silent warning to behave himself, before leaving. And then, for the first time, it was just the three of them. Anna, Thomas, and their son Thomas cleared his throat. "Do you need help with anything?" Anna adjusted the baby in her arms, exhaustion evident in her posture. She hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Can you hold him while I get some rest?" Thomas's breath hitched. She was trusting him, even if only for a moment. "Of course." Anna carefully passed the baby into his arms, and Thomas held him as gently as possible, as if he might break something so small, so delicate. The baby stirred slightly but remained asleep, his tiny fingers curling around the fabric of Thomas's shirt. And just like that, everything changed. This wasn't a business transaction. This wasn't about power or control. This was love, real, unconditional. And for the first time in his life, Thomas understood it. The first night was brutal. Thomas had no idea how much work went into caring for a newborn. The baby woke up every couple of hours, crying, needing to be fed, changed, held. Anna moved through the routine effortlessly, even though exhaustion clung to her like a shadow. Thomas tried to help. He really did. But every time he reached for something, Anna would instinctively take over, not out of malice, just out of habit, because she had been doing this alone. And Thomas hated that. He wanted to prove he was more than just a spectator in his son's life. But how? The answer came at dawn. Anna had just fed the baby and was struggling to keep her eyes open. Thomas saw the way her body slumped from exhaustion, the way she rubbed her temples, fighting off sleep. She needed rest. So, before she could protest, he stepped in. "I've got him," Thomas said, taking the baby from her arms. Anna blinked, clearly too tired to argue. "You sure?" Thomas nodded. "Get some sleep." And this time, she let him. She didn't fight it. She didn't question him. She simply lay back against the pillows, closed her eyes, and within minutes, she was asleep. And Thomas, he stood there, his son in his arms, rocking him gently, realizing that this was what being a father meant. Not just being present, but showing up when it mattered most. The next few days followed the same pattern Thomas learned. He learned how to hold his son the right way, how to change diapers without fumbling, how to rock him to sleep when he got fussy. Most importantly, he learned that fatherhood wasn't about being perfect. It was about trying, and he would try every single day for the rest of his life. One evening, as Anna sat on the couch, nursing a cup of tea, she glanced at Thomas, who was carefully dressing their son in a tiny onesie. She had been watching him these past few days, watching as he adjusted, as he stepped up, as he became someone new. And she realized something. She didn't hate him anymore. She didn't fully trust him yet. She didn't know if she could ever love him again. But she didn't hate him, and maybe, just maybe, that was the first step towards something new. A month had passed. Anna never thought she'd say it, but having Thomas around wasn't as unbearable as she expected. She had assumed his presence would bring old wounds to the surface, that she would feel trapped by the memories of what he had done. But instead, something else had happened. Thomas had changed, not just in the small ways, like learning how to change a diaper without looking like he was defusing a bomb, but in the ways that actually mattered. He showed up every single day, not for her, not to prove anything, but for their son. And that, more than anything, made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, he was capable of being more than the man she had left behind. One quiet afternoon, Anna sat on the balcony, rocking her son in her arms as the warm autumn breeze drifted through the air. Thomas stepped out, 2 mugs of tea in his hands, without a word. He set one beside her and took the seat across from her. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It wasn't heavy like it used to be. It was comfortable. Thomas watched as she gently ran a finger over their son's tiny cheek, a soft smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I never thought I'd be this kind of man," he admitted. Anna glanced at him. "What kind of man?" he exhaled, staring out at the city skyline. "The kind who wakes up at 3 in the morning to rock a baby back to sleep." Anna smirked. "Yeah, well, neither did I." Thomas chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I was an idiot." Anna raised an eyebrow. "Just an idiot." He sighed. "A selfish, arrogant, blind idiot." Her lips twitched. "That's more accurate." Silence stretched between them again, but this time there was something else there. Something lighter. Something that felt almost like forgiveness. That evening, Thomas found himself pacing the living room, watching Anna from across the room. There was something he needed to say, something he had been holding back for weeks, and for the first time in his life, he was terrified of saying the wrong thing. Anna noticed his tension instantly. "You're overthinking something," she said. He stopped, exhaling. "I am." She set down her book and met his gaze. "Then just say it." Thomas took a deep breath. "I need you to know that I'm not doing this to get you back." Anna blinked, clearly caught off guard. He continued, "I know I hurt you. I know I lost your trust, and I don't expect to ever earn it back." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "But I also know that I have a son now, and I refuse to be the man who lets him down." Anna's throat tightened. She had never expected Thomas to say those words, and for the first time she realized he really had changed. Not because he wanted her back, not because he wanted redemption, but because he had finally learned what mattered. And maybe that was enough. For now, days turned into weeks, and something new formed between them. Not love, not yet, but something softer, something that felt like trust. Thomas didn't push. He didn't try to fix what was broken between them overnight. He just stayed, and for the first time in a long time, Anna wasn't afraid of letting him. Because this wasn't about the past, it was about the future. And maybe, just maybe, they had one together. No longer as husband and wife, but as partners, as parents, as something new, something worth fighting for.